The first streak of dawn cleaved the sky like a blade, pale gold, bleeding through the charcoal hush of night. Cold coiled in the rafters of the cabin, wind hissing through the chinked logs, and under the warped door like a breath held too long. Josie Morrow stood in her nightdress, shotgun loose in her hands, staring down at the boy crumpled across her floorboards. Blood, bright and ruddy, pooled beneath his ribs, staining the pale pine like spilled wine. He couldn't be more than 16, maybe 17 if you counted the set of his jaw and the way he'd held her gaze before he collapsed, like he didn't expect mercy but still needed it. She didn't speak, not at first. She just watched the rise and fall of his chest, shallow as a dying campfire, and let her silence wrap around the room like smoke. The horse had come first, thundering down the slope behind her cabin with no rider in the saddle. She stepped onto her porch with the rifle half raised, thinking rustler or scout, until the boy appeared seconds later, staggering, gasping, blood on his side and powder burns on his shirt. He'd fallen against her door without a word, as if the place had called him from the wilderness. Now he bled in the hush where her fire should have been, in the home she'd built with her own blistered hands 4 winters past. Josie didn't take in strangers, didn't offer warmth to ghosts, but she didn't let things die slow, neither. She dropped to her knees beside him, the gun still within reach, and peeled back the rough coat he wore. The wound was deep, gut-shot, but angled high, not low enough to be fatal if the bullet hadn't torn anything vital. His skin was gray, lips bitten bloody from the ride. She reached for her wash basin, the bandages she kept for herself, and the whiskey that tasted more like fuel than comfort. "You move, you die," she murmured, not as threat but promise. He didn't stir, might not have heard her. Might already be halfway to meeting whoever'd sent him into this world. The cabin was no doctor's parlor, just timber and grit and Josie's hard-won quiet, but she'd learned to suture clean and burn out rot. You couldn't live this far west without knowing how to make the dead wait their turn. The boy cried out once when she poured the whiskey into the wound, a raw sound, half cough and half prayer. She didn't stop. By the time the sun cracked over the ridge, she'd stitched him shut with trembling fingers and rolled him onto a bed of deer hides near the hearth. Her fire hissed to life, reluctantly catching on kindling soaked from last night's storm. Smoke curled through the air like something remembering pain. Josie stood, swaying. Blood darkened the hem of her shift. She washed her hands in cold water and stared out the window, where dawn painted the mountains in fire and ash. The wind had changed, carried something sharp and foreign. Trouble didn't just wander into her life, not anymore. It had to be chased there, and someone somewhere was chasing this boy. She didn't know his name. Didn't know who he was or what he'd done, or why the look in his eyes reminded her of a man she hadn't spoken of in 7 years. But she knew the signs. When the wind carried silence like this, sharp-edged and hollowed out, something was coming. Maybe riders, maybe worse, the boy groaned. She looked back, saw him stir, lips moving without sound. Josie stepped closer, crouched beside him. He whispered, barely audible, "Tell her I came back." Josie blinked. "Who?" His eyes fluttered. "Mud." Then nothing. Outside, the sun rose higher, catching the snowline in its teeth, and in the hush that followed, the mountains breathed. By noon, the boy was fevered, sweat slicking his brow like morning frost turned to dew. His pulse stuttered under her fingertips, skipping like a colt on unsteady legs. Josie kept watch in silence, one hand wringing out a cloth in cool water, the other steadying the rifle propped against her hip. The trees beyond her cabin creaked with the weight of snow high in their limbs, and somewhere a jay shrieked like it had seen too much. No birds sang, no hoofbeats, but she felt the land tighten, a breath held in the belly of the hills. She didn't ask herself why she hadn't let the boy die. Some things didn't need naming. Her conscience had grown quiet over the years, buried under frostbite, loneliness, and the long weight of grief. But when she looked at his face, young still, despite the scar above one brow, she saw something that stirred the earth of her memory. She moved around him like a ghost, stoking the fire, grinding herbs she'd foraged the summer prior. Yarrow bonewort, a sliver of willow bark. She brewed them into a bitter tea, lifting the boy's head with surprising gentleness to trickle it past his cracked lips. He coughed, thrashed once, then lay still again. By the time the moon rose silver and thin, he opened his eyes. She was skinning a rabbit by the hearth when she felt him watching, didn't flinch, didn't turn right away. She waited for his voice. "Where am I?" it rasped, dry as cedar bark. "You're alive," she answered. "That's more than you were yesterday." A pause, then, "You a doctor?" "No," she stood, wiping her hands on a cloth worn soft by use. "But I know how to sew a man shut and keep his fever low." He tried to sit up, failed, and fell back with a wince. "How long I been here?" "Not long enough to owe me anything." That quieted him. He blinked, gaze dragging around the cabin. Not much to see, rough beams, antlers over the door, iron kettle swinging on a blackened hook. A woman's place, but not gentle, not lived in by softness. "I didn't mean to. I didn't know where else to go," he said finally. Josie studied him. His voice was high yet, barely chased the edge of manhood. His hands, now curled weakly against his chest, bore dirt under the nails and a livid welt across one wrist. "You were alone?" she asked. A flicker of something passed over his face. Fear, then guilt. "No," he murmured. They were with me. "Two others. We got jumped outside Dun Hollow." Josie stiffened. Dun Hollow was 3 days east, past the ridge and into country where lawmen grew thin and graves outnumbered trees. If someone bled their way across that land, it wasn't for a noble cause. "You run?" she asked. "I didn't mean to," he swallowed. "They told me to, said I was the smallest, fastest." "Names?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Don't matter now." She let that sit. The boy was holding on to something, not just pain. He'd been taught fear, trained in silence. It made her wary. He didn't ask her name, and she didn't offer it. Some understandings are older than words. Later, after he slept again, she stepped outside into the stillness. Snow had begun to fall, light, dry, wind-carried. It hissed against her boots like ash drifting from a long-dead fire. She scanned the tree line, her breath fogging in the air. A broken branch here, faint hoofprints there leading away. They hadn't followed him, yet, but they would. She walked the perimeter, checked her snares, reburied the rifle she kept beneath the porch in oilskin. Her hands were steady, but her heart beat slow and hard against her ribs, like a bell tolling for what was to come. She carved a life from solitude, built it plank by plank after everything else had been taken from her. And now a boy she didn't know bled on her floor and spoke of unseen riders and broken promises. As she stepped back into the cabin, the fire popped, sending sparks into the dark. And outside, far off in the woods, a second horse screamed. The scream of that horse, raw, unnatural, didn't echo. It was swallowed whole by the trees, as if the forest knew to keep secrets close. Josie stood still in the doorway, her breath catching sharp in her throat. Snow fell heavier now, painting the world in blurred whites and grays. Nothing stirred beneath it, nothing visible. She stepped back inside and shut the door without a sound, bolting it top and bottom. The boy hadn't woken. Fever kept him tethered to sleep, mouth parted slightly, one hand curled against the stitches at his side. The firelight danced across his face, casting shadows where there should have been youth. Josie gathered her coat, the heavy wool one lined with rabbit fur, and slung her second rifle across her back. The moon was rising slow behind the clouds, a pale eye in a sleeping face. She left through the back, stepping off the porch into the deeper drift, silent as frost. It took her half an hour to reach the creek bend where the woods ran thickest. There between the trees she found the horse, or what was left of it. The beast was still breathing, barely. Its flank had been torn deep by something sharp, maybe claws, maybe knives, she couldn't tell in the dark. Its eyes rolled white, and steam curled from its nostrils as it tried and failed to rise. Josie knelt beside it, her hand on its neck. "It's all right now," she whispered. "You done your part." She put a bullet in its skull. Snow covered the blood quick, the forest eager to reclaim silence. She stood slowly, scanning the woods. No boot prints, no trail. Whatever had done this hadn't come for the horse. It had sent a message. Not all hunters wore spurs. She turned back toward the cabin, her mind working faster than her feet. Something had changed. This wasn't a gang's doing. This wasn't vengeance or robbery. Something older stirred beneath this. Back at the cabin, the boy was awake again. He watched her come in with wide eyes, one arm trying to push himself upright. "I heard it," he said hoarsely, "out there." She didn't answer, just removed her coat and tossed a fresh log on the fire. "You said there were 2 others with you," she said. Did they make it? His lips parted. I don't know, maybe Sam. He had the map. We were supposed to cross the pass, sell what we had in Auburn. What did you have? He looked away, Josie's jaw tensed. She stepped closer, crouching low until they were eye to eye. Don't lie to me, not in my home, not after I stitched you up. He swallowed. We took something, from a man who'd buried it under an old church east of the hollow. Her pulse slowed, cold now in her ears. What kind of man? I didn't know his name, just that he rode alone, and folks called him the Crow Walker. She stood up fast. There were stories, old as snow, older than the rail lines. Stories of men who'd made pacts with things not named in town, who disappeared into mountains only to return with shadows for eyes and ice where their hearts should be. Josie had heard them, dismissed them. But she'd seen things in her time, at Shoshone Crossing, and again on the plains during the drought, things that hadn't made sense in daylight or dream. She stepped to the window, watching the tree line. You and your friends stole from the wrong man, she said. He flinched. It was just silver, buried in jars, old coins. Sam said it wasn't cursed, just hidden. Josie didn't speak. Outside, the wind shifted again, coming down off the mountains. It carried no scent, no bird calls, no signs of life. But in the hush, she heard the crackle of branches, something moving slow, deliberate. They weren't alone. The boy whimpered, low in his throat. And Josie, who hadn't prayed in 10 years, whispered a name she'd buried with her daughter. Then she reached for her knives. By the second nightfall, the boy could stand, barely. Josie made him do it anyway. She pulled him up with no softness, her fingers digging just enough to remind him pain was still part of living. He swayed, cursed, then caught himself against the wall with a grunt. Good, she said. Now move. He limped toward the hearth, dragging his bad leg, face pale beneath a sheen of sweat. She watched him struggle, offering no help, just a thin blanket of presence behind him, enough to catch if he truly fell, but no more than that. When he reached the fire and didn't collapse, she allowed herself one slow breath. You've got half a day's strength left in you, she said. If they come before that, we run. If they come after, we stand. The boy nodded. Didn't ask who they were anymore. She'd seen the moment belief replaced doubt in his eyes, sometime after the horse, after the silence that crept too thickly around the walls. She poured him broth and sat across from him with her rifle laid over her knees. He looked thinner than the day before, like the fever had burned out more than just sickness, like it had taken some part of his boyhood with it. I never meant to bring this here, he said quietly. You did anyway. I was just following Sam. He said we'd be rich, said no one miss old coins from a buried church. Some things buried don't want to be found. He shivered and looked into the flames. You ever lose someone? Josie didn't answer. Instead, she rose and walked to the far wall where a covered frame leaned between old crates. She knelt, brushed aside dust, and lifted the cloth. The boy turned at the sound and stared. The portrait inside was drawn in charcoal, rough but tender, a woman and a child. The girl looked 5, maybe 6, same eyes as Josie's, same stubborn chin. My daughter, she said softly, Clara. He waited, but she said no more. She didn't need to. The absence in her voice spoke louder than grief. She replaced the cloth and turned back to him. What's your name? He hesitated. Daniel. She nodded once. Sleep when you can. We'll need both eyes tomorrow. Outside, the snow thickened again, but this time it didn't fall. It rose, lifted from the ground in curls and spirals, as if the earth was breathing out frost. Josie went out at first light. The air stung her face, bitter and wrong. She circled the cabin, knife in hand, stepped slow and listening. Then she saw it, a mark carved into the doorframe. New, deep, it was a circle, jagged around the edge, with a line down the middle and 2 strokes through the base. She traced it once with her finger. No animal had done this. Inside, Daniel stirred. She found him staring at the ceiling, pale, lips bloodless. I dreamed of them, he whispered. They walked between trees without touching them. Their mouths didn't move, but I heard them speak. They said, I belong to them now. Josie said nothing. Instead, she opened the trunk by her bed. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and linen, lay a long coat. Black, worn, stitched with old scars. She lifted it out, and beneath it a pistol, ivory-handled, handcrafted. Etchings in the metal shimmered faintly even in low light. Daniel blinked. "You were one of them, the riders. I thought they were just stories." "I left," she said. "Long before you were born." He stared. "Why?" She didn't answer, but her fingers tightened on the pistol, and her eyes shifted to the mountains beyond the frosted glass. Not for the first time, she wondered if leaving had ever mattered. Because some shadows never stopped riding, and now they were coming down the slope. They came not as men, but as shapes carved from storm and silence. At dusk, Josie stood at the tree line, the cabin behind her, Daniel inside with a blade at his side and a whisper of her voice in his ear. "If they take me, don't run to save me. Run to be free." The snow was still now, not falling, not drifting, just waiting. Then from the slope came the riders, 3 of them. One carried a staff taller than himself, bound with bones at the crown. Another had no face, just a smear of ash beneath a broad hat. The last was small, slight, perhaps once a child, and it moved with the twitching gait of something long dead and long used. Their horses did not breathe. Josie stepped forward, coat open to the cold, pistol loose at her hip, hair whipping across her jaw like dry grass. "I don't want your war," she said into the hush. The staff-bearer turned his mount toward her. From his throat, a voice like cracking ice. "It was never yours to want. Blood has called us. The coin bears weight." Josie did not flinch. "That boy is no warrior, no summoner. He's just lost." The faceless one leaned down, voice slithering where lips should have been. "All who steal the coin inherit the curse. It passes through bone and dream, even to you." She raised the pistol. "You'll not touch him." They laughed not with joy but with hunger, a sound older than wolves. "You'd stand against us for a thief?" the child thing asked. Josie's eyes burned. Not for a thief, for a boy with no one left. That stilled the air. The riders shifted, horses stamping without breath or heat. The ground beneath them cracked with frost. "You forget who you once were," hissed the staff-bearer. "How we bled together in the old wars." "I remember too well," she said. "That's why I left. That's why I buried Clara in soil untouched by your boots." The small one stilled. The girl was ours too. Josie's rage sparked like flint. "She was mine, and she is gone." For a moment, silence. Then the faceless one lifted a hand and pointed past her to the cabin's dark outline. "We'll have the boy." Josie moved first. The pistol barked once, twice, a third time. Silver rounds, not of this age, forged with prayer and grief, tore through shadow flesh, scattering ash and howling wind. One rider fell, screaming into the earth, bones twisting in protest. But the others came on. The staff struck the ground. The world shuddered, trees bent, the air screamed. Josie staggered but did not fall. She reached the porch in time to see Daniel at the window, eyes wide with fear and something more dangerous, guilt. "They said I took more than coins," he gasped as she burst in. "Said the map wasn't just a map, it was a lock. I opened something, Josie." She caught his shoulders hard. "What did you open?" His eyes filled, a name written in salt. "I read it aloud. Sam dared me. I thought it was a story." Outside, the mountain groaned. Josie's heart turned to lead. Some names spoken, "Do not return to sleep." "Get to the back," she ordered. "Don't come out unless I call." "But..." "Go." She stepped out again, blood roaring in her ears. Now there were more, figures gathering behind the riders, pale things with hollow chests, shadows with hands too long. The staff-bearer lifted his arms. "The boy is marked, the bond is opened, he is ours." Josie raised her pistol, empty now, and dropped it. Then she drew the blade from her back. A long knife, dark as night, curved like a crescent moon. She whispered the oath she swore once beneath stars long buried. "I walked away from war," she said, "but if war comes to my door, I will not turn." Then she charged. The blade sang through the cold, a dark arc born of old rites and blood vows. When it struck the staff-bearer's neck, there was no scream, only a silence that buckled the trees and split the sky. He crumpled, and the ash of his body scattered like crows taking flight. The others recoiled. Shadows flinched, blinked, retreated a breath's width. Josie did not pause. She moved through them like wind through tall grass, swift, unseen until she carved a space they could not fill. Her coat tore at the sleeves, her hair wild and matted with frost, but her eyes burned clear, clear as the morning she buried Clara with no preacher, no kin, just her 2 hands and a worn locket pressed to the child's chest. Another shadow reached for her, too slow. Her blade found the hollowness where a heart should have lived. It folded in on itself with a whisper. Then came the faceless one. He stood taller now, broader, as if the death of his kin had fed him. His fingers curled and the air thickened, congealing like tar. Josie's limbs slowed, her breath caught. "I remember your name," he said, voice bleeding into her thoughts. "Josie Morrow, Oathbreaker, Widow of Flame, you belong to us." She stumbled. The blade slipped from her grasp. Behind her, the cabin door opened. "Josie," Daniel's voice. "No," she gasped, reaching toward him, but it was too late. The faceless one turned. Daniel stood there, holding the coin. Not silver, but black now, a disk that seemed to drink light. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I didn't know what it was." The thing stepped forward, hands outstretched. Daniel didn't run. Instead, he held the coin above his head. "I name you," he said, voice shaking, "as thief, as curse, as shadow without soul." The air twisted. The faceless one shrieked, recoiling. Josie's hand found her blade. She rose, she ran. And with one cry, half war, half prayer, she drove the knife into the faceless one's chest. This time it screamed, not just one voice, thousands, all the broken tongues of things lost and twisted and wrong. The forest burst into wind, snow spinning backward, time unwinding in howls, then silence. The wind stopped, the ash fell, and Josie stood alone, blade buried in the frozen ground. Daniel knelt nearby, shaking, the coin gone. Only a scorch mark in the snow where it had fallen. They said nothing for a long time, not until the stars came out. "Are they gone?" Daniel asked. Josie looked up at the mountain. For the first time in days it breathed soft. No longer like a beast waking, but like a mother settling into sleep. "For now," she said, "some things never go forever, they just wait." He nodded. "I shouldn't have taken it. I wanted to bring something back to her. My ma, she's sick. She sent me west to find fortune." Josie watched him, thin, pale, still too young to carry so much. "You still can," she said. He met her gaze. "You mean it." She nodded, "but not with gold, with truth. You carry this story back. You carry it like a knife in your coat. When they ask what you found, you tell them what was lost." Daniel's mouth quirked, almost a smile. "And what if they don't believe me?" "Doesn't matter, you'll know." They spent the night by the fire. Josie didn't sleep, just sat with her back to the door, eyes on the dark, blade across her knees. At dawn, Daniel stood at the edge of her porch, coat too big, horse saddled. She walked him out, handed him a flask and a pouch of dried meat. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." She didn't smile, just touched the brim of her hat. "Ride fast, speak light." He nodded, then paused. "Will you be all right?" Josie looked to the mountain. Snow glittered along its edges like dusted iron. "I always have been," she said. He rode east, where the sun began to rise. Josie watched until he disappeared into the haze. Then she turned, stepped back inside, and stoked the fire once more. There would be more winters, more boys with broken names, more ghosts, but for now the mountains breathed easy, and she once again was their keeper.